Everyone eats out, but people often miss how the food arrives on their plate. Every meal has a story of growers, suppliers, founders, and operators making it all happen. Welcome to Grounded. I'm Lauren Mitchell, and each week I will bring you conversation with the amazing people behind the brands you know and the ones you'll want to know. Grounded is powered by the Buyer's Edge platform, the leading food service digital procurement network, powered by data, software, and collaborative relationships. Let's get grounded. I cannot wait to introduce today's guest. He's a franchising disruptor, we'll call him, a food service innovator, and a bold voice, reshaping how we think about hospitality. Over the past decade, he's taken the food service world by storm, appearing on Good Morning America, landing the cover of FSR magazine, and being featured in major outlets like the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and Nation's Restaurant News. Under his leadership, Shuckin Shack Oyster Bar has grown from a single idea into a powerhouse, redefining what a casual coastal experience looks like. He's the CEO of Shuckin Shack, Jonathan Weathington. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm super excited to have this conversation. I think our listeners are going to learn a lot today. We've got a lot of fun topics. I want to start off out the gate here asking you this. What is something you believe about restaurant leadership that perhaps most CEOs wouldn't say out loud?
Honestly, I think restaurant leadership is way too overcomplicated too often. I think most people try to take the approach, or many people rather, take the approach of everything has to be figured out all the time. And I think my approach is, I don't know if it's different or not. I know several other CEOs or just leaders in general that think this way, but really all that matters is the guest happy? Are they going to come back, and are they going to tell others? And everything that you should be doing should be focused on those three things. So I think one thing that maybe people wouldn't agree with perhaps is that everything has to be figured out, and that it's super complicated. It's not really all that complicated at all.
Keep it simple. What were the three things you said? So are they happy? Will they come back?
And will they tell others?
And will they tell others? I heard you say before that the best marketing on earth is superb operations. Elaborate there.
Yeah, I got a little flack for that. I was actually, this was several years ago at a very large conference and got put on a marketing panel. And I gave them the primer ahead of time. I said, you guys know that I'm an operator at heart, right? You don't know that. I don't think you want me really speaking on marketing, because I'm going to tell you exactly what I think, which is I believe that the best marketing possible is superb operations, meaning I believe in making every restaurant brand on earth, regardless of whether it's QSR or FSR, or if it's just a single mom and pop location, if it's a drive-through. We all make promises to our guests, right? So we make a promise to our guests. We have to deliver on that promise. Marketing makes the promise. Operations delivers on the promise. Now I ask you, which is most important? Is the most important thing making the promise, or is the most important thing delivering on the promise that you've made? I would argue every single time that the most important thing is delivering on that promise. So that's where operations comes in. If you market to someone, to a potential guest that's never dined within your restaurant or going through your drive-through or going through your serving line, and you make a promise to them that you'll be the quickest or the best tasting, you'll have the best service or the coldest drinks or whatever it may be, and they show up to your restaurant or your drive-through, your service line, and they don't have exactly what you've promised them, then your operations has failed and your marketing doesn't matter, because they may not come back. They're certainly not going to enjoy their experience. They're certainly not going to come back, and they're definitely not going to tell others. So operations is the best form of marketing.
I love what you said there. Marketing makes the promise, but operations delivers on it. The guest experience. So here's the $1 million question, and you can answer this in your experience at Shuckin Shack, or even just in terms of a suggestive answer for high growth brands. But how do you keep teams engaged in the little things? How do you maintain visibility or control over what's happening across multiple restaurants, multiple state lines?
I think the biggest thing you do is you listen. You listen to people on the front lines, because for me, I'm several years removed at this point from working in the restaurant every day, or I come from an extensive retail background. I haven't worked retail in years and years. But the more you move up from an operations standpoint or into a role like mine, you have to start listening a whole hell of a lot more. I think the further you move up, the more you should be listening. And so listening to the people under you, listening to the people under them, listening to your frontline employees, and then most importantly, listening to your guests. And there's, with the way technology is and guest feedback is readily available to everyone. And myself in the position that I'm in, that's one of the most important things to me. I don't spend a whole lot of time trying to dictate things. I spend a whole lot of time sometimes reading customer reviews, sometimes answering customer reviews, sometimes responding to calls to the home office. I spend a whole lot of time listening to the people underneath me to actually give me critical feedback into what's actually going on within the restaurant. So it doesn't really matter. You can just keep adding zeros to your numbers of units, but you've got to listen more and more and more often.
Yeah, I listened to an awesome, talk by Kevin Hochman, with Brinker International, and, in a similar response, he talked about flying into markets and gathering area managers in for 2, 3 hour meeting and just listening to them, asking basic questions. One of those being, if you were CEO, what would you change? And it was fascinating to share some of the answers that, he would go home on his flight and just, mind blown that had he not asked that question, he wouldn't have learned that answer and wound up implementing some of these updates that not only were great for the company, but empowered the employees to continue to give that feedback. Any experience similar?
Yeah, no question. I mean, for us, we have an annual conference with all of our franchisees, and we welcome feedback. We do surveying within our franchisees, and then when we're looking at our two company units, I mean, we spend ample time within those two company units actually learning what's going on. And that you're exactly right. If you don't ask the questions and listen to the responses, but most importantly, start to part and parcel those responses into actionable items of things that you must do or the most common things that you need to do, then you're going to be behind. You've got to listen to your front line. My job, 15 years ago went from spending, let's say 60 to 65 hours a week in front of customers to now where I spend the only time in front of customers that I get is when I dine in the restaurants or when I choose to work a shift in the restaurants, which I do. But you've got to listen. You've got to stay in touch with what's actually going on within the four walls.
All right, getting back to growth and you being a franchise disruptor, we'll call it. You emphasize opening up healthy restaurants, period. Again, prioritizing long-term brand health. So not trying to scale too fast and getting over your skis. Can you share a little bit more about what your focus has been here specifically for Shuckin Shack and maybe even a little bit more about what a guest can expect when they walk in?
Absolutely. I think we often get asked the question. I think every CEO or CDO or whomever on the franchisor side, anytime you do a podcast or an interview or a publication or anything, we always get asked the question. So, what's your goal? And that's begging the question of how many units do you want to open? And certainly, we have internal goals that we traditionally don't share externally. But for us, we just want to open healthy restaurants. And what that means to us is obviously going all the way back to those three things restaurants in which people have a great time, they come back and they tell others. And so when we're choosing franchisees to come into our system, when we're awarding territories and opening new units, that's our primary focus is to make sure that our guests are very, very happy. They're going to come back and they're going to tell others about their positive experience. And then that experience pretty much entails an authentic coastal experience. I was very fortunate. I grew up near the coast. And so for me, shooting down to the beach to have seafood and a couple of drinks was not a big deal. It's never been a big deal. But for folks coming from the Midwest or Ohio Valley or wherever else, that experience may be limited to them maybe once or twice a year, maybe once every other year at best. And so for us, when people walk into our restaurants, regardless of where you are in the country, what we're looking for is an authentic coastal experience. It's a place where you would walk into one of our restaurants. There's no spiel. Okay. When you walk in, I tell this to our frontline employees all the time. I don't want to hear you say the words, welcome to Shuckin Shack. The person walks in the door, they know exactly where they are. Statistics prove that they saw us online ahead of time. They popped in directions into iMaps or Google Maps. They traveled to us. You don't need to remind them when they walk in the door where they are, because if you opened your own restaurant, you wouldn't say welcome to Jonathan's restaurant. That's silly. And so you tell them, welcome, have a seat wherever you'd like. We'll bring some drinks over. You make it a truly authentic, hospitable experience to whoever walks in. And then beyond that, I think the rest of the rest of the guest interaction follows suit in that. We don't necessarily need to tell everyone our daily specials. The majority of folks can read. If they want us to tell them, we can, but we have a chalkboard with those specials listed in all of our oyster locations and our seafood locations. Generally speaking, someone who drinks a rum and coke doesn't care about a tequila drink that's on specials. They don't care. They will tell you exactly what you want, and that's what you should go get them. And so for us, we hand out the menus and we try to make it as simple as possible. People just want to be treated well. And when you take away all these preconceived notions of you have to check, 26 boxes A through Z in every single guest interaction, it relaxes everyone that's participating, including the employees. And so that's what we're after. We just want people to be happy. We want them to come back and we want them to tell others.
That is so awesome. I mean, specifically with restaurant experience, the ability to visit a place through food without having to travel all the way there is a gift. And reading a lot about the brand, that's truly what you guys are starting to put together in terms of just that ultimate hospitality experience. Can you share more about the fresh and raw tour? That was something that kind of piqued my interest, and I would love for you to kind of unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, the Fresh and Raw tour happened as a crazy idea. I was in Nashville with some buddies going to a concert. We had an extra seat. One of my friends put it out on Twitter that he had an extra seat. And next thing you know, a very famous singer songwriter joined us for the tour and we hung out and it was awesome. And so we got to talking a little bit and then we left Nashville and I was talking to my friend and said, man, it would be really, really cool if we could just hire this guy to go to a few of our restaurants over the summer and perform. And so it started stewing then, and then COVID happened. And so it kind of got put on the back burner. Long story short, it got rekindled. I had pitched this to Darren, who's our VP of marketing, and then the rest of our ops team as well. And I knew there was something there. I knew there was something there. People love live music. I wanted to make this happen, and we wanted to make this happen. So Darren was at a conference in Dallas. He met a lady there who happens, this was not related to music at all. And he happened to meet a wealth manager for country artists who works for who works for Truist. And she said, oh yeah, we can make that happen. That's no problem. And so Darren comes home and this is like mid-July and says, hey, I think we could do this next year. So this is July of 22. And I said, no, we're going to do it this year. And so in about a 5-week period, we planned this tour that we hired 2 singer songwriters out of Nashville. They went to all of our restaurants. They did a free show for everyone. We paid for it, and we used it to raise money for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And so over the past 3 years, we just finished our 3rd year. We're coming into our 4th year this year. We're gonna have some small changes this year, but over the past 3 years, we raised over $200,000 for LLS, and it's become, one of the things that we're known for, and it kind of happened by accident. And we're taking longer than 5 weeks to plan these, but now we. But yeah, man, it's a lot of fun. Our franchisees really buy into it. It's a great experience for everybody that comes in.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it also contributes to just that coastal, summertime outside just eating experience is just the music. And I imagine you can pull some really cool emerging artists from the immediate communities too. It'd be a great, way to give back to those as well.
It's really neat. A lot of the artists that, or actually all of the artists that have performed with us have had hits with like major country singers, not small guys. We're talking like Luke Combs, Florida Georgia Line, Morgan Wallen, like all the big guys. These are the guys that actually write the songs. One of the unique things about it is that you actually get to hear the songwriter play it in the form that it was meant to be played, and which is slightly different sometimes once it reaches production and goes to one of these bigger artists. So it's been a great experience for all of us. It's really, really neat. And obviously it just kind of was something that fell into our laps. Our marketing engine never stops on our side, but it fell into our laps. And of course, the most important thing that we're doing is raising money for LLS. And so we're super stoked about year 4 coming up.
Thank you so much for sharing about that. That is just, I mean, we're going to get into the brand itself and more about what goes on within the walls toward the end of the show. But that is just so cool. And again, speaks to the nimbleness of how you kind of support the operation and keeping it unique and ever responding to what the guests want and what you believe to be, the best part of a hospitality experience. Awesome. Okay, let's take a left-hand turn into more ingredients and distribution. And again, I know you've got your hands in a lot of different lanes. That is what I'm curious about. So as CEO, not being directly involved, what kind of visibility do you have into your supply chain in terms of the ingredients selection, and partnerships with suppliers?
Sure. So we have pretty wide open visibility with those things. It's very transparent, actually, working with RPP, Consolidated Concepts. And so for us, we're able to trace the traceability is extremely high on our end, whether it's our oysters, whether it's shrimp, whether it's produce, whether whatever it may be, we can look at all of that from our side because one thing that we did from the get-go when we started franchising, seafood is very intimidating to a lot of people. And so for us, we wanted to make sure that the contracts that we were securing were repeatable. Honestly, that we could get the same seafood at the beach or you could get the same seafood inland that we can get at the beach. And that certainly is the case. And so quite literally, we're working every week, sometimes every day, on making sure that from a commoditized standpoint that we're set up to make sure that our stores get the products that they need to cook and serve to customers. And so it's one thing that's both static and dynamic. It's static in the sense that we've held true to our roots, which is we serve domestic product in our restaurant. So wild caught domestic shrimp, wild caught domestic fishes. It depends upon what it is. A lot of our oysters, if you're near the coast, come locally, but then we also get oysters from Virginia. So that's kind of the static portion of it. And then the dynamic portion of it is just securing pricing, securing contracts whenever they need to be secured because there's a season for everything that comes out of the ocean. And so making sure that we're working with our supply chain team on those and that we're signing those contracts so we can have fairly stable pricing. COVID kind of being the outlier, the sore thumb throughout it. We were literally talking about supply chain every single day during COVID, a call every single day. Now it's calmed down a good bit, so it's not quite as dynamic as it was then. However, it's still something we work very hard at, and like I said, the transparency and the traceability for us is very, very high.
Love the guys at RPP and CC. Thank you for sharing that. And I have a couple questions about the seafood in particular, but because you've been with the brand since the first unit, now we're upwards of almost 20 or around there. Can you talk about how you might have had to pivot suppliers or some supply chain decisions just in that? And maybe it's based on going from 2 corporate locations to now majority franchise. I know there's a lot of people that have questions just kind of how do you decide between local versus national? What leeway do you provide your franchisees to make some of these, vendor choices? Touch on as much of that as you can or you'd like.
Yeah, sure. I think, Matt, who's one of the founders, my business partner, he tells the story best. He said back in the early days when they had one unit, they would go down to the docks, because it's a walk just straight to where the commercial boats come in, and they would buy a few 100 pounds of shrimp and they would head them right on the dock right then. And they would put them on the ice and then take them back to the restaurant and then put them in the steamer and serve them to customers quite literally straight out of the water that day. They would do that every morning. Of course, we can't do that anymore. And so what we had to do, we had to pivot some of those things. We serve Gulf shrimp. And so we had to make sure that whatever shrimp company that we were working with could supply our entire chain, so to speak, with the quality of shrimp that we were looking for, which is a wild caught domestic 2125 shrimp or a 5160 shrimp. So that part is very, very set in stone. It's very axiomatic in what we believe as far as brand operations are concerned. And so, of course, when you get to the point where it's not just 200 pounds a day, you're talking millions of pounds a year. That changes things quite a bit on our side and how we have to approach things. And so, having really really good vendor partnerships has been very helpful. We've been with U.S. Foods since 2007, and we've gone from one DC to 5 DCs. And so, for us, having a national contract, working through an MDA, and making sure that they're going to stock things in a DC that's further away from the coast the same way that they would near the coast has been really, really critical. And then as far as working with franchisees on what decisions they can make locally, we're pretty open, we're pretty liberal with that. There's some center of the plate items that do not change. Everything is exactly the same as it was on day one, quite frankly. But other things like, we have restaurants that are within 10 minutes we have a restaurant within 10 minutes of one of the best places in North Carolina for oysters. And so there's no way we're going to dictate to that restaurant, you must get your oysters from Virginia. And so we've actually helped them secure, not necessarily secure contracts, but work directly with oyster farms that are local to them, a 10-minute drive from them, to make sure that the product that they're serving, meets all specifications. It's all tagged. It's all from a commercial oysterman. So we've done all of those things. And then some of our more inland markets, one of the things that we do, one of the things that we learned very, very early on is to always have a backup supplier or a secondary supplier, even with seafood. So even though we work with US Feeds, we work with what would we consider some secondary suppliers in some of the other markets. And so we work behind the scenes a lot. Our ops team, Sarah, does a great job on looking behind the scenes rather, and matching product codes essentially, so that we're just talking about a cod loin from US Foods. If they're suddenly out of stock, we know what a cod loin is from Halpern Seafood or Supreme Lobster or wherever else. And so we're matching those behind the scenes, and that all happens prior to opening, so that there's really no disruption in the product coming into the restaurant. There's limited disruption on any sort of out of stock items. It just makes it a lot simpler when we're doing that work behind the scenes.
I hope I hope everyone's kind of on the same page with me. I mean, when you listen to you speak about your practices and your principles, you have very strong principles, but you're explaining perfectly when and where you make exceptions, and you're drawing a line back to the guest experience. I love that example of where local product really just makes better sense to source locally. I think a lot that resonates with a lot of people. I also read that you said US Foods was your distributor. I think you're one of your buyers from US Foods is actually now a franchise partner. Is that true?
No, so we have some interesting folks in our system that have kind of been around our system for a long time. One of our franchisees in Florida, he used to work for another franchisee, and one of his first jobs was driving a truck for a distributor. And then, yes, our franchisees in Greenville, South Carolina, they both used to work in the food business on the supplier side. One of them worked for a company that got acquired by US Foods. And so, yes, they saw the food business from the supplier side, and now they're on the restaurant side.
So, I mean, that speaks a lot about the brand too. When I believe she was a seafood buyer. And yeah, to your point, Chris Foods acquired them and now she's a franchise partner. It's so cool. I read that. I'm like, so many times you want to jump to the other side of the fence because you fall in love with the principles of the brand and the ingredients. And then, I mean, who would know it best, right? So that's so awesome.
Yeah, Margaret, that's Margaret Markham in Greenville. She definitely knows her stuff. She can talk seafood with you all day long, and now she owns a restaurant. She doesn't work on the supplier side anymore. It's kind of cool.
Very cool. You also talked a little bit about having your secondary supply chain in place and a backup, but that advanced understanding of the relationship to the primary spec, I think that's critical as well. Just overall, in your opinion, what do you think it takes to procure the very best in terms of quality ingredients?
I mean, constant communication, constant innovation, I think is one of the things. I think for a restaurant like ours, and it's a smaller footprint, we don't have a ton of storage in our restaurants. There's some things that will, as far as I can see, forever remain static on our menu. We're always going to serve steamed shrimp, obviously because of our name. We're always going to serve oysters, and so making sure that your sell through on those items is exceptionally high, and working with your distributors on those things and saying, this is how many pounds of this thing that we did last year. This is how many, singles that we did of this item last year. This is where we believe we're headed next year. What can our pricing be on these things? I think it's constant communication. It's not one of those things where, you can set it and forget it. You got to stay on top of it. I get a commodities report every single Monday morning. I read it cover to cover every single Monday morning. Our folks at RPP, they help us out. We have a weekly standing call. And so we know the right times to buy. And even if you're one or two units, you can look all of this information up. You can look up the cycles, the life cycles of, when the proper time to buy seafood is, or whatever commodity it may be. If cheese goes up or if beef goes up or whatever it may be, making sure that you're staying in contact with your vendor partners is the absolute most critical thing that you can do, because if you're not doing it, someone else definitely is. And they're going to buy the product that you wanted to buy at the price that you wanted to buy it.
What are the biggest risks that you're tracking today that others might be overlooking?
So I think obviously, the T word tariffs, it seems to kind of have cooled off a little bit. Now we're very lucky that a majority of our product is domestic, 90+% is domestic. And so it hasn't affected us quite as much. There is a domestic implication, obviously, and I won't get into that. You guys can Google search that. But that being said, I think that one of the things that you just have to constantly keep your eye on, and we talked about it earlier, is that guest experience. The landscape on the front line is changing. It is changing, and it has changed in the 11 years that I've been here. What the guest wants has not changed, meaning they want a good time, they want an experience. However, how they want it has changed. COVID was a watershed moment. It was a complete pivot point in our industry, and we saw that happening in real time. We got to experience those changes on a weekly basis, and then post COVID has been entirely different. I think that a majority of people, we forgot how to be people for a little while there. Everybody came roaring back into restaurants, and everybody was super nice, and that lasted for about a month. And then people realized that, the restaurants are understaffed and perhaps the guest experience wasn't what it was previously. And we are, barely keeping our heads above water and staffing and all of those things. And so I think the guest experience for many brands very, very much suffered, especially on the full service side. And we still need to be thinking about that, how we treat our employees, how we retain them, making sure that they're in the right seats, making sure they're doing the best for the guests in front of them. Um, on top of that, I mean, it's really just, I'm a believer in being exactly who you are and being unapologetic about it. And for me, on the brand side, I think for us, it's just remaining true to our roots. We know exactly who we are. We do what we want to do because what we want to do is serve our guests well. And I don't think that every single restaurant on the planet has to chase every rabbit. They don't have to chase every trend. If you deliver on your brand promise through your operations, if you deliver on that every time, people will come back. They will come back. And I think that's what we need to focus on.
So, with all of your emphasis on hospitality, the guest experience, and delivering through operations, there's still a place for technology. And sometimes that can contradict with the guest experience, especially if you're trying to speed up or automate some of the components to just even, in-house dining. Are there certain areas that you've implemented technology that you think are worth it enough to share? Or can you provide any examples of that?
So we're in a really interesting position because the word shack is in our name. And so we want it to feel somewhat like a shack from a guest perspective. So the screens that the guests should see in our restaurant are the TV screens playing sports. That's pretty much it. Maybe if they're near the expo window, they'll see the KDS screen. But outside of that, we try to keep things pretty simple, stupid. Now on the back end, that's the big difference, right? We're talking behind the kitchen doors, or when we're doing inventory, when we're doing purchasing, we can use, some of RPP stuff. We can use some consolidated buyer's edge. We can use all of those things to determine exactly what we need to be purchasing and when. And so from a technological standpoint, a vast majority of our technology is hidden. And it happens behind the scenes. It happens before the restaurant opens, and it happens after the restaurant closes. And we believe that gives our management staff, we believe it gives our frontline employees the opportunity to put on their best face, and to serve the guest exceptionally well, because that's really all that we care about.
How about just any innovations in the food service industry in general? Anything that excites you coming online in the next 2 to 3 years, just that you've seen in your experience of being out?
So, I go to National Restaurant Association show every year, and you can tell what's hot and then what is not hot approximately 12 months later. Um, Been very, very interesting the last 3 years going, because I remember 3 years ago, there was a robotic everything. I mean,
Yeah.
if you said, I want to see a robotic snake delivering drinks to a table, you could probably find it at the National Restaurant Association show. It seems this year it wasn't quite as popular. And so I'm less inclined to chase innovation. I actually think a big portion of innovation is being true to your brand. I mentioned this on another podcast I did recently, in that probably about 5 years ago, this was just post COVID. It seemed like, from a restaurant marketing standpoint, there were kind of full service agencies that said they could do everything. I mean, literally everything. From customer acquisition and new franchisee acquisition to technology to point of sale to customer loyalty to whatever it may be. I mean, you name it, they could do it. And what I've seen more recently is actually a divergence from that. I've seen more agencies that kind of have figured out we need to do this one thing and this one thing only, and we need to do it exceptionally well. And I think that in and of itself is innovation, because it takes away this necessity to be everything to everyone when you're talking about a supplier or a vendor side. And so for me, I'm really excited about that because I would rather, certainly, if you can have less vendors or less suppliers or less whomever, that's good. But at the same time, I would really, really rather work with one company and all they do is product X or service Y. And I know that they will do it better than anyone else. Let's say that they're at 100% level. I would rather work with a company that's going to do it at 100% level than work with a conglomerate that says they can do absolutely everything, but nothing is above 30% maximum. And so that's one thing that it really, really gets me amped about innovation. It's almost like this proliferation or this deconsolidation that everyone has to be everything to everybody. And so I like that. I'm a big fan of that.
I'm curious. So, kind of an interesting thing that I saw, and it kind of resonates with your brand, just being high quality seafood, fun, genuine vibe and atmosphere, but obviously of the sea. Have you heard of something called wines of the sea?
I don't think so.
Okay. Do you guys serve wine in your restaurants or no?
Yeah, you serve a little bit of wine, sure you.
Okay, just a little bit. So there's actually, so they are aging wine underneath the sea.
Oh,
They believe with no direct exposure to sunlight and the temperature down there. So they're actually aging it underneath the ocean. I'm like, how cool would that be if they came to the table with a bottle of wine that was actually aged underwater?
yeah, that's super novel. That's really cool. I'll write that down.
Cool. Okay, so here I want to get into Shuckin Shack specifically. Walk us through, what someone can expect if they walk in. They've never been before. You talked a little bit about the screens there, the seafood, and the vibe. And then, is there a moment that you've realized so far that we'll call it not just a restaurant, but more of a movement, just in terms of just the culture?
Yeah, I mean, walking in, we're not saying welcome to Shuckin Shack. We're saying have a seat and be right over, or what can I get you to drink? We depend on our front of the house, our bartenders and servers to really read the room and read the table. We want it to be an authentic experience. Our average guest spends about 56 minutes in our restaurant, and so we have a really long time to mess things up. We have a really long time to mess things up. That's not our goal, obviously. And so we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we just read the room. If you and three ladies are out on a Friday night and there's no one else and you're dressed to the nines and you're sitting at a table, you probably don't care about our fish special. I would bet money that you don't. I would bet money that you're more concerned about what we serve at the bar. And so that's how we're going to approach it. And so we're teaching people that authenticity doesn't necessarily mean this static thought of you have to be the same all the time. Authenticity means treat other people like humans. And so that's what we're after. If a group of guys and girls come in on a Sunday at 12 o'clock and they all sit up to the bar and they've got football jerseys on, I would guess that they're there to watch football. And so that's how we're going to treat them, as though they're there to watch football. So we need drinks in their hands immediately. We're going to be asking them about what channel they want the television on to make sure that they're served correctly. That's an authentic form of service. Just like you might walk into my house, I'm not going to say, welcome to my house. I'm not going to say, how many are here? Well, I invited you, so you're here. It's you or one other person or whomever it may be. I'm going to say, have a seat on the couch. What do you want to drink? Or come stand at the kitchen bar with me, whatever it may be. That's the authentic nature of service that we're after. And so I couldn't tell you, to be honest, what everybody's experience is like, because everybody's experience is going to be a little bit unique. And then as far as kind of this watershed moment or this moment of clarity, or I think the cool moment for me, it happened in 2017. I was downtown walking past our restaurant, and I was walking past, it had to be a mother and daughter, and they stopped right up. It was when our restaurant was around the corner. We relocated a year later, and they stopped in front of it. And the daughter looks up, and I overhear the whole conversation. She looks up and looks at our sign and says, "Oh, there's a Shuckin Shack here too." we've got one in Greenville. And that was so cool to me. And here's why is because that's one of our company units. It's been open the second longest in the entire system. Greenville's a franchise location. And I hear that all the time. When I'm on the road and I have a Shuckin Shack hat on, regardless of the city that I'm in, or a t-shirt or a polo or whatever it may be, someone says, in fact, I was at a gas station in South Carolina, and we don't have a Shuckin Shack near that area of South Carolina. And I had a Shuckin Shack hat on, and the person behind the counter checking me out said, "Oh, do you work at the Greenville location?" And I said, "Kind of." And they're like, "Yeah, I love going there. That's the best place." And I said, "Great, well, thank you."
That's so
And so for me, not knowing that it's a franchise or, that makes my day. Honestly, I don't care if anybody ever knows that we're a franchise. As long as they're coming in, having a great time and telling others, that's what we're after. And so I love seeing that. I get to experience that not on a weekly basis, but probably once a month to have someone stop me and say, "Oh, do you work in location X?" Them thinking it's the on location. It's the only location. And I just love it. I love it. It's a really, really cool thing.
very well described. I think that really speaks to, again, just that authentic, unique experience that each restaurant aims to provide and the connection to the community and the localization. So let's talk about that. If there's someone listening and they want to become a future franchise partner, what is it that you guys look for any new members or partners? What's the qualifying criteria? And cover that relationship with the community as well, because I think it's an important one.
Sure. Yeah. I think you can look at all the on paper qualifications on our website, but just generally speaking, this may sound super stupid. Um, but the truth is you have to be able to talk to others. We are in hospitality. And a big part of hospitality is treating others hospitably. And a big part of that guest experience, like I said, 56 minutes we have to really screw this up with the guest. A big part of that is the dynamic that you share with that guest. And a part of that is talking to them. And so making sure that you're a person that is gregarious and outgoing and is kind of mayor of your town and has connections and knows how to read the room and just can talk to others. It's such a critical component of being truly hospitable within the four walls of a restaurant. And so for me, that's A1 day one. We have had people come into our office with all the money on the planet, wanting to open a location, and we're far more interested about how it performed in their spreadsheet and their matrices, and couldn't hold a conversation. Couldn't hold a conversation. And for me, it was a no. They were declined. It's happened on several occasions. And if you can't talk to someone, at least have the management in place that can. And so for us, being members of the community is a big part of that. Being out and about. That's one of the things that I always ask when people come in for observation day is, okay, I ask two questions almost, well, every single time. The first question is, how are you involved in your community? What are you doing? Are you a member of any civic organizations? Are you a member of your church? What do you do to get out and about in the community to meet others? How are you doing that? Describe for me that. The second question I ask is, let's pretend you're working a 9 to 5 job. It's Friday at 5 o'clock. You're in the parking lot. You just get in your car. You put it in reverse and slide it into neutral, into drive. You're pulling out of your workplace. Where are you going? That answer tells me everything, because if their answer is, I'm done with the week, I'm going home to watch a movie, I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock, that's not what I'm after. But if their answer is some form of, I'm meeting friends for drinks, or I'm going out to dinner, or I can't wait to go interact with other people, or I'm going to do this thing, or it's I'm running home real quick, changing clothes so I can go out. That's what I'm after. There is a grit factor in owning a restaurant and being a franchisee that cannot be ignored. You are owned 363 days a year, and you've got to be owned all the time, regardless of how the open was, regardless of whether or not your shipment for the day or your truck for the day showed up or not. You've got to be ready to hang out with other people and be around guests. And so that's a big part of what we look for in incoming franchisees.
How about if budget was not a constraint? What is one thing you would implement for the brand tomorrow?
If budget was not a constraint. Um, I mean, funny answer would be I would just pre-buy all of our seafood contracts. If budget was not a constraint, I would pre-buy all of our seafood contracts from now until the end of eternity to make sure that we had static pricing from now forever. We could really get our food costs where we want it to be. We could man, we would have the cheapest pricing in the history of restaurants, a few hundred years from now.
So one of my favorite parts about being in fresh produce is meeting the farmers and the growers, walking the fields and doing supplier tours. I imagine you've done that with some of your oyster farmers. And I'm curious if you guys recycle the shells and if you could talk a little bit about that. I don't know a ton about what's typical, but I'm curious to learn a little bit more. So have you followed the path of some of your seafood products into to where they come from and meeting those farmer partners and then talk to us about the shell program?
Yeah, we have. I've actually gone to several of the oyster farms that we work with. I've been out on the boat with them, been in the water in my waders and with them. So that's a really, really cool process. As far as what we do with the shells, yes, we recycle them where it's available, where it's possible. We work with the Department of Natural Resources, both in North and South Carolina, and those shells a lot of times go back out into the water. They help build, the structure, the reefs, if you will, the clusters, so that you can grow more oysters because it's a life cycle, right? So oysters start out as spat, which is a really, really, really tiny oyster, and then it grows over time. And so for us, having protected areas where we can return those oyster shells has been something important. We've been doing it for a really long time. At one point in the state of South Carolina, I think we recycled something like the third most oysters statewide or something like that. That was several years ago. But yes, it is something that we do. We try to clean the oyster shells. We put them in big buckets, and then they get picked up generally once a week.
So much respect for each of your restaurants and how they're ocean-friendly environments. You guys are doing such a fantastic job. I would love to kind of finish up with what I call final mile, more quicker questions. Give the audience too a taste of where you've come from in terms of retail. So here we go. You ready?
Sure.
What tool in your workday saves you the most time?
What tool? AI now.
So the next generation of folks coming into the restaurant, food service industry, hospitality, what do you recommend for those coming into the business?
What do I recommend? I recommend making sure that you're treating your guests well every single time. It doesn't matter what type of day that you've had, but if you focus on that, you're going to be just fine.
You were brought into this position young. After speaking to you, I can understand why. Many different lanes in your previous life, chasing outdoor adventures, biking down celebrities in Wilmington, studying international relations. Can you explain what is something that you learned early on that's strangely relevant to what you're doing today?
Be kind. I think that's the biggest thing that I learned very, very early on. Regardless of what you're doing, there's always an opportunity to be kind to others. And honestly, that's a big part of the reason why I am where I am and why I've been able to do all the things that I've been able to do is because when you're kind to others, it lets people's guard down and you become trustworthy, and it gives you opportunity that you never thought you would have.
Do you have a mentor in the business, and in what way?
I've got a number of mentors. It would be a crime for me to try to mention one. I think that I have a lot of really, really strong mentors that I have what I call a bat phone where I can text people who are far smarter than me, have many, many more units, some of them thousands, and say, "Hey, do you have a second to talk?" And they'll call me right away. So yeah, yeah.
All right. For those that want to get a hold of you, first of all, I'm going to say check out Jonathan's LinkedIn page. He's got this awesome baseball series that he runs on there. So definitely friend him on LinkedIn. But is there any other place that people can get a hold of you or the brand if they want to learn more and connect?
To get a hold of the brand, you can go to our website, theshuckinshack.com. And the only social media I have is LinkedIn. And I do respond to messages. So
Thank you, Jonathan. You've been fantastic.
thank you.
And to our audience, if you learned something or laughed like me a couple times today, please share this podcast with someone you feel could benefit as well. Thanks again, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
That's a wrap on this episode of Grounded. We've covered a lot of ground as we explored what it really takes to run food service behind the scenes. For show notes, highlights, and our latest market insights, visit us at groundedonthepod.com. Grounded is powered by the Buyer's Edge platform, delivering smarter solutions, greater efficiency, and real savings through connected tech, powerful data, and industry expertise. For more information and to get a personal demo of the Buyer's Edge platform, email me at lauren.mitchell@producealliance.com. And if you liked what you heard, subscribe so you don't miss an episode.